All right, so I'm going to show you this workflow that automatically grades the phone calls that your account receives or that it makes outbound. And the way we have this set up is it only works for the first phone call, but if you wanted, you could add multiple phone calls. And what we're doing here is we're checking if this is a qualified lead, if it's someone who's actually interested in the service of the business. If they're not, then we can actually mark that person as spam and activate D&D so they don't call again. But if they are interested and they're a potential lead, then we can check if they booked and add a tag for that to better help with reporting or sales performance grading or anything like that. You could add extra steps onto this workflow, and yeah, it'll basically grade every single phone call and just hopefully automate a lot of manual work. I was talking to an agency owner the other day who has someone who literally goes in and listens to every single phone call in order to mark people as qualified or not qualified and then booked as or not booked. And this system can basically do that entire thing automated. I do want to kind of preface this by saying you're going to need to play with the prompt a little bit. It's not going to be perfect, and there may be some kind of tweaking of like the wording to get it to do exactly what you want. But in general, this workflow should work probably 95% of the time to correctly mark leads. ChatGPT is really good at determining intent of kind of conversations and lead statuses. Okay, so let's get into how this works because I think it's actually pretty sick. And what we have here, first of all, is this trigger. This is actually an app I built. Basically what it does is it grabs the transcript and formats it so that ChatGPT can read it. And what we're doing here is we're putting that transcript into the notes. So this is basically just for debugging. As you're implementing this workflow and as you're kind of seeing how ChatGPT behaves and how it interprets conversations, you probably want to see a log of what it's kind of thinking about. And so the way this works is we're using a chain of thought. So if you think about OpenAI's O1 model, or O3, I guess is the new one, with that, it's basically reprompting itself until it comes to a solution. And this is sort of similar because what I tend to see people do is they see if this lead is qualified, then output qualified. And if it's not qualified, then output not qualified or something like that. And this isn't the best way to do it because ChatGPT has to read this whole call transcript and just output one word. It would be like if I asked you, what's 5,443 divided by 9? You can't answer that off the top of your head unless you're a human calculator, but you can't answer that. And so what you have to do is get out some paper and write it down. So with this system, we're asking ChatGPT to give us a whole kind of explanation, basically in a few paragraphs, argue its position on whether yes or no, and that'll give it more tokens where it can actually kind of reason it out and explain why it thinks something. And then we go back. Basically, this second step is going to read that first response, and then it's going to reply with qualified or not. And then we have a debugging step here where you can basically see that first response, so you can see exactly what ChatGPT said, and then you'll see what it ended up deciding with the second prompt. And so from there, now that we have a one-word response, we can feed it into our next step. So either if they're qualified, they're going to go down our first path. If it's other, we have a separate path for that. And then if it's neither, let me just show you this. This is another trick you can do in your AI workflows, is if you're trying to get ChatGPT to output one word at a time. Basically what we're doing here is we're saying no quotes around a response, no other words, just reply this word or this word. Sometimes it's going to still, say, based on the summary, it should be qualified. And we could do contains qualified, but in some cases it might say, based on the summary, we can't say qualified. And so you just have to get it to output one or the other. And if it only outputs, or if it outputs anything else, we wait 5 minutes, and then we have a go-to step, and we're literally just going to run back to that first step. And, we're not saying anything extra, but we're just basically try again, all right? Do a better job this time. So we're refeeding that back if it gives something that we're not satisfied with. Then on the other path, I'm going to show you basically a lot of people, they get spam calls and they want to mark them as D&D inbound, but they don't really, it's a pain in the butt to do that. So what you can do instead is basically we ask ChatGPT the same thing as above, but this time we're asking it to explain whether or not that phone call was from spam, okay? And so we're doing the same thing. We're getting it to output spam or other. And if it marks that conversation as spam, Then we're going to enable D&D for all channels, and if it's not spam, we're not going to do anything. So that contact will have no tags. Then, as far as the qualification goes, if they're qualified, we're going to mark them as qualified, and then we're going to check if they're booked. So for your business, this may vary. Maybe it's important that they're a business owner, maybe it's important that they're the director of finance or some certain position. And so what you can do here is you can ask for the specific details that tell you how did this call go, and is it worth kind of moving on. And you can also chain this. If I do copy all actions from here, I can just paste that right here, and that will give me a separate workflow step that I can use to further evaluate that lead. So you can basically just compose these steps. Basically all we have is, this ChatGPT, this debugging step, and then an if. So you can just compose this into whatever you need. So for this step, we're asking if this person booked or not. And so we're telling it to argue. It's very important that you tell it to argue for or against, because if this step only has like conflicting views where it's like, on one hand, we think it booked, but on the other hand, it might not have, that's not helpful, and that's not going to get you a decisive kind of response. So what you need for this step to argue for or against a certain position, and it should be able to do that if you tell it to use a few paragraphs, because it'll have more tokens to kind of reason with. And tokens, by the way, are kind of like words in AI. And so with this, we're asking if they booked, and we have another debugging step just to see like what did it reason out, and then you can see we're adding a tag for that. And if they didn't book, then you can also maybe you can add a task. I'm thinking about making a video where we use ChatGPT to create tasks based on these phone calls, because I think that would be cool, but there's a fair amount of extra work that would go into making that comprehensive, just because some people you might follow up with them the next day or in a couple of hours. Some people it might be 9 months later. So you just have to kind of deal with that logic. So it would be a separate workflow. But yeah, in general, this should work to eliminate a lot of manual work. If you're manually reviewing calls, or if you don't even have a review process in effect, you might have a problem where you're getting leads for your clients, but you don't know if those leads are actually turning out qualified, or if they are qualified, what rate is your client actually booking them. This is going to give you insight into that. And of course, you could add this data to Google Sheets for every contact. You could just, add it with the stat, or you could just filter them in the contacts view to figure out kind of how they went. So anyways, this workflow all hinges on my custom trigger, which basically gets that transcript. I said this before, but I'll leave a link below where you can install this app or check out the documentation for this workflow, and then I'll have a snapshot there when you install this app where you can get this workflow, or you can just build it yourself. It's up to you. But anyways, thank you for watching, and yeah, feel free to let me know. My website's down there. Let me know if you have any questions or are looking to do something similar. I can definitely help you build out a workflow that does this.